So this presentation today is going to have two main takeaway points, but the key one is that using software like Qualtrics can actually allow us to link practical education and real-world activities with the kind of research that's normally done in labs. And just before starting, I just wanted to say one thing. I'm originally from Trinidad. That's one of these small Caribbean islands. And I'm telling you now because people often say that they miss the first part of my talk because they're confused about where I'm from. So now that's all that puzzle. I hope you have your full attention. And I also wanted to thank and acknowledge my major collaborator on this work, Sam Maldonado, who's based out in California and San Jose, who's worked on me with all of these projects and is often doing things using Qualtrics and programming that I just didn't even know were possible. So there are two things I think to think about over the course of this talk. One is, if someone told you that you just couldn't build surveys anymore in Qualtrics, what would you use it to build? And I ask this question because I actually have a confession. I've actually never authored a survey in Qualtrics. So at this point, the people who invited me from Qualtrics might be getting a bit nervous. But actually, I have 648 Qualtrics surveys in my account over 7 years. So what is it that I'm using these for? What I actually think is really powerful about Qualtrics is by focusing on just modular components, like presenting information, requesting information, you actually can pretty much do most of human activity that way. Most websites or most web applications involve presenting content and pulling information back. And so I actually think that we might start thinking about how do we use Qualtrics as a rapid authoring tool for components of websites or interactive web apps. And there's actually a second reason to really think about using Qualtrics more broadly. And this is because I think it's an example of a new class of software that allows us to have practical applications implementing the exact same technology that we would use for research. And so this is what's motivated a lot of my research, which is basically as people move from out in the physical world, for example, a student doing math homework, to digital environments, like a student solving math problems, I think presents huge opportunities which we're not quite reaching yet. But these opportunities are that simple step from pen and paper to an interactive math exercise or video is actually a pretty profound one because it links two contexts that normally are very separate. One is a researcher's lab, where we do experiments and collect data, and another is a student's classroom, which is where real-world learning is occurring. And this digital environment basically bridges both of these, allowing us to align scientific research and practical impact. And does this because we can have a web app, a Qualtrics survey code running on an online site that's being used for a real-world purpose like learning, but actually is also allowing us laboratory features like being able to randomize experiments where we compare different versions and collect data. So online software might really be a completely new opportunity if it's the right kind to bridge research and practice, which often are quite separate. So to think more on the practice side now, if you were trying to build some online training or education, what are the options available to you? Here's an example a colleague of mine at Harvard has been working with, where the Massachusetts State Ethics Commission has got this online training and they're trying to migrate it. So the options available to them are create or program a website just from scratch, or using some kind of pre-made option, which is pretty intensive programmer-wise and has certain limitations. Use a learning management system, which many of you are familiar. Maybe your campus has their own, or their Blackboard or Canvas Moodle. And then recently, there's this new trend in massive open online courses, which is something I've done research on, Coursera, edX, and so on. Of course, every one of these has their limitations. They have their strength as well. But I think one important way that Qualtrics kind of addresses gaps in many of these is that it actually makes it really easy to do rapid authoring and to collect data and do experimentation, the kinds of things we normally need to do in research. So if you think now about online education and training, how would you use Qualtrics for this? And so here's actually a re-implementation of the site done by Bill English, who's my colleague at Harvard. And he's trying to convince the Massachusetts State Commission to use Qualtrics for this, because as you can see, you can use table of contents to basically put those sections. You can embed videos, you can embed text, You can put next buttons that move through different pages. And this table of contents lets you treat each block with a navigatable area. Now, what are the limitations of this? That's something we can get into later. But for example, if you approach a company like, or organization like Massachusetts State Ethics, they want to serve about 300,000 users. And they actually want a different kind of license from what we normally have for Research Suite. They don't want to use all the features of Qualtrics. They basically just want to use it to present education materials. So the kinds of site licensing options aren't right. But also there's just generally a lot of skepticism. They're concerns that is something that's a survey software really going to be useful for education? How do they scale this up? To what extent will this kind of feature be supported in 4 or 5 years? So while it's actually tremendous, you can even do this at all in Qualtrics, there of course is limitations to keep in mind. Now I looked a bit at presenting lessons. What about things like quizzes and tests? So for example, using Qualtrics, you can quickly author a survey that includes some quizzes, for example, on math problems. And then you can just send this out by URL to students, or they can even open it up on their mobile phone in class. And so this is something I did first to get tests in the calculus class at Stanford. And more recently now at Harvard's Kennedy Public School, there's a faculty there, Dan Levy, who actually not only uses it to test students, but actually to collect information from them beforehand on what they find hard or easy to understand. So he gives them a quiz. He asks them to explain the rationale for the answer choice. He also added in questions where they rated how confident they were about their answers. And then Dan Levy and us actually look at the responses students make using a reporting suite, and then go back into class and discuss its response with students. So it's a very quick real-time interaction. And again, enabled by the fact that you can often do things much more flexibly with Qualtrics than you would have imagined if you think about it as a survey, but also it has these data analytics features. Another example is, what if you look at the kinds of things that are available now for online education? So this is Khan Academy, and this is industrial strength online learning. They have millions of students visit every month. And so this is a very interactive math exercise. Students can enter answers to see if they're right or wrong. They can ask for hints. But we decided to make our own version of this Qualtrics exercise because that would allow us to deploy it wherever we wanted and put our own content in, as well as make other features. And so this is really collaboration very much led by Sam Maldonado, I mentioned before. And basically, having looked at the Khan Academy website without 50 programmers and an entire development suite, Sam and I were able to re-implement this exercise in Qualtrics. So now in a simple Qualtrics survey, which we're happy to share, you can basically type in an answer, check if it's correct, request hints so that you can get help along and get feedback on your answer. To go even farther afield, one thing that I'm now starting to pilot is actually using Qualtrics for interactive apps for things like health behavior change. So for example, imagine giving a short, memorable hyperlink like tiny.cc mood coach to someone to use when they're in a bad mood, or even if they're actually in counseling for things like depression or anxiety. They go to the link and it pops up. And it basically is giving them options for what kinds of strategies or tips or ideas they want to try out to help improve their mood or to apply what they've been learning about managing mood. And they might click the first one and list some things that they're grateful for that day. They might go into another one that involves rating the mood, or they might go down yet another path about contacting a friend. So it's kind of like a choose your own adventure. So I focus very much showing you that actually the space of Qualtrics is much larger than you'd imagine. You can almost just use it to build arbitrary web applications. But now that's actually, I think, not the biggest selling point. It's even better. While those focus on practical impact, the key thing is that Qualtrics is heavily used for scientific research. And in fact, all of the examples I present are things I've only done in the last 3 or 4 years. But all 7 years I've used Qualtrics, it's been completely to run psychology experiments. And so it's really powerful to be using the exact same software to implement a practical application, like a lesson, as well as also to be collecting data and analyzing it for the purpose of learning more about how people think or how people learn. And the approach that I take in this research draws on a concept I've developed with collaborators called a MOOCLET. And the key idea is that if you want technology to be actually aligning your practical goals with scientific research, then you want to aim for designing it so that it satisfies the definition of a MOOCLET, which is it's a modifiable component of a website that allows you to collect data. For example, these lessons or exercises, but also is set up so that you can easily design alternative versions of these lessons or exercises, and you can experimentally compare them and then personalize them by giving different users different versions. This is actually simple but quite powerful because then you can actually do perpetual iterative improvement. You don't just put up a website and it's stuck in stone. You can actually make different versions, test out which ones work, personalize, and give different people different whatever's most effective for them. And if you're interested in reading more about this research approach and what we've done, you can look at that reference, that hyperlink. So how can you actually use this? Well, you'd be surprised, looking at all of the platforms I've worked with, it's actually quite hard to find platforms that really make it easy to author these MOOCLETs so that we can do experimentation, personalization, and constantly improve. But actually, there's one that does a pretty good job. Anyone has any guesses? Okay. So here's how actually I've used Qualtrics, for example, to compare alternatives in an experiment. So you might have just done it for a lesson to show your students, but actually within that, we can now embed research. So here's a massive open online course at Stanford, an experiment roughly that I ran last year, where students are taking a course, and within the course, we actually embed via an iframe a Qualtrics survey. And at first, it was kind of obvious that you'd stuck Qualtrics in, but I've actually now styled the CSS because it's flexible so that people don't even realize sometimes that it looks any different. So users are pretty happy, as well as instructors. So let's say you think, I'm not sure if it's best to give students a video explanation of a concept, or if it's actually better to give them a text explanation. Now, normally we just have to make a decision, but actually, if you use the software that allows you to do practical rollout plus research, we can actually test them out. So half the students are randomly assigned to get video, half randomly assigned to get text. And then we might see how they do on future exercises to see what was more effective. So under the hood, how does this look? Well, you can set the embedded data variable, like type of intro, either from a panel or just actually doing it in a randomizer. And then when it comes to presenting the different versions of the video, there's a Qualtrics survey embedded there. And basically, if the value is a video, then there's an if statement that presents a video. If it's the text, then simply present the text. And so the next key part is you then see how people do on something like these exercises, which could be another survey or the same survey. And then you actually analyze that data. And based on what you find more effective, you just go back and remove the randomizer, or you put everyone in the video condition or the text condition. Now, you could also personalize by user characteristics. If you think, well, I'm not sure if video or text is better for everyone. I actually think that different people benefit from video and different from text. And so you might already believe that, for example, people who are doing well will benefit more from the text. People who are having trouble with the material will benefit more from video. So in similar kind of setup, but now actually you have this variable, like entrance quiz score, which either you could get from some source like your class materials, or you could actually collect in a survey by giving them an entrance quiz and setting the variable to be low if they get a low score or high. And then when they actually come up to the video, if the entrance quiz score is low, you show them the video. If it's high, you show them the text. So this is, I've shown you now how you could do experimentation personalization, but you may not have time or you may not be sure exactly what you want to focus on. In this case, actually, again, it's powerful to just have used software that enables research and practice. So what I actually focus on a lot is basically, even if you have a practical goal, and that's what you have time for, as long as you've used online software, like what I just mentioned, that's a MOOCLET, which is any kind of Qualtrics survey can be set up as, is you have the opportunity to partner with researchers. So you, for example, could consult with a researcher or collaborate with one who's interested in experimenting to improve your lesson or interactive application. Then they analyze the data, and that now has practical feedback for you because you can either choose the version that works well, or you can personalize by giving students the ones that help most. And if you're really feeling ambitious, is cutting edge, this semester we're rolling out a pilot where we actually use algorithms that we have on our computers that automatically do this process by connecting to the Qualtrics panel through the API. So to kind of sum up the kind of key ideas I covered here. First was, just as a thought experiment, pretend for the next 2 weeks that you weren't allowed to build services in Qualtrics. What would you use them for? What would you build? And I think we almost need a new word. I don't know, Qualtrics come with one for things that are built in Qualtrics that aren't actually surveys, just using it as the sort of as a high-level programming language for web applications. I showed some examples of lessons and quizzes and exercises that you can author, and I'm happy to share those files. And even now pushing towards interactive health education and health behavior change apps. A key point here was that if you implement Qualtrics in the right way, or software like Qualtrics, you can actually simultaneously practice and research. We can really align these. And one approach I talked about that I've taken is basically identifying these MOOCLETs, pieces of a technology we can experiment with and personalize, and in fact automatically improve. So moving forward, at tiny.cc/Qualtrics Insight, I've actually got links to resources relevant to the presentation today, as well as the slides. And tiny.cc Qualtrics Online, I did some draft resources I put together on this in my spare time. So I'm very happy if people have suggestions or are interested in working on developing that as a shared resource. And if you have any questions about linking Qualtrics or using software to link research and practice, please feel free to be in touch. Thanks so much for your attention.